The ahupua of, no, this is Humu'ula. Humu'ula is the ahupua that we're in. That's crown land, okay? When you go up Mauka, you're gonna hit the ahupua of Kaohe. That's where TNT is supposedly gonna be built, okay? So Kaohe is government land. In 1848, the Hawaiian Kingdom statute, they recognized Kaohe as government land under the control and supervisory, under the supervision of the Minister of the Interior, okay? In 1893, that was Samuel Parker. He was the Minister of the Interior in 1893. Humu'ula, Crown Land, was, as of 1865, under the Crown Land Commissioners, okay? That was formed by statute in the Hawaiian Kingdom. So these are the two entities that would give consent on any property here. So Crown Lands, you can only get up to a 30-year lease under Hawaiian law from the Kingdom era. And government land, you can get a royal patent grant, right? Fee simple, whatever the case is. So we're going to get into that with this. I just remembered. We're going to cover that in class. We got 4 more minutes. And then I can address who owns the land, who claims to own the land, and who found out that what they claimed wasn't so and somebody else claims to own it. So, yeah. You got Minister of the Interior, Crown Land Commissioners, Department of Transportation, Hawaiian Homes. I'll explain that. Yeah.
So, Keanu, in the meantime, until that issue is settled, do they have the authority to make arrests?
No. I mean, this whole thing is illegal. So we kind of pick and choose what's legal, but really what's going on, because some of the people that are acting upon orders, they don't know either. And that could be your cousin who's a cop. That could be your boyfriend who's a sheriff. Don't care, you know. So the best thing that I would recommend is, instead of trying to point fingers on who and what, let's try to understand what's going on, and then we kind of approach it in that way, right? So this idea of kapu aloha isn't new. It didn't start here. Kapu aloha on a crisis with the United States invasion actually started with Queen Lili Okalani in 1893, when she told the people, stand down and let James Blunt do his investigation. Don't create a situation. That was kapu aloha. So I think we are continuing where they left off. And you're going to see that what they did through kapu aloha, they ensured that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists, their country. So we just need to understand how they do that, because what we were led to believe was what they did didn't work, when in fact it actually did. Yeah. So I'm buying time. I got 1 more minute. Any questions from what we covered this morning or earlier this afternoon? Okay, let's begin. So for those of you who weren't here this morning, my name is Keanu, and I have a Ph.D. in political science. So I teach at the University of Hawaii. I teach a graduate course out of the College of Education. We start classes this Wednesday. And I also teach out of Windward Community College, writing intensive course, Introduction to the Hawaiian Kingdom. My doctoral focus and my research is on the country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's not on the sovereignty group, the Hawaiian Kingdom. When I refer to the Hawaiian Kingdom, as I stated earlier in my first presentation, I'm making reference to, and I use my great-grandfather as an example. My tutu's dad, William Kuakini Samerson, was born in a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. That Hawaiian Kingdom was a constitutional monarchy, very progressive. Literacy back in the kingdom was second to Scotland, okay, and Boston, right? That's pretty high, right? Newspapers were pervasive. One professor who did his doctoral dissertation on the Hawaiian newspapers of the 19th century, his name is Puuhuluhulu Nogomeyer, out of anthropology. He's also a Hawaiian language teacher. What he realized is that the newspapers, it ended up becoming a form of communication between the people of Hawaii from one island to the other. So on Kauai, when they receive the newspaper and they make a comment in the editorial, that following week you'll probably get a response from somebody from Kau. It was almost like the newspapers were like an internet. So communication was good back then. right? Given the fact that we didn't have telephones, we didn't have TV. A lot of times, when you read a newspaper, it's very didactic. Didactic means it's very one way. You read it, you get the story, you put it down. In the Hawaiian Kingdom, they read it, they hear what's going on in Kauai, hey, they want to respond. And it ended up being a form of communication, that's pretty cool. Yeah? And that's something unique that grew out of Hawaii. Not that they're trying to be better than anybody else, right? So this Hawaiian Kingdom was very progressive. It had over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world. The United States had an embassy in Honolulu. Do you folks know where, on Mauna Kea, where Hawaiian Tel is? Okay, that used to be the American embassy in Mauna Kea, on Mauna Kea Street, right? You used to have a French embassy over here, right? Hawaii had an embassy in Washington, D.C. Now, we also had consulates. Now, consulates and embassies are not the same. Embassies represent the government in that particular capital to that government, right? Consulates are in the outlying cities. And consulates are there to represent the nationals of that particular country, whether you have Hawaiian subjects living, let's say in Boston, or you have a lot of business transactions taking place from Hawaii into Boston. So the consulate would be there to look out for the nationals. Yeah, economics. Also, if you get into trouble, under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, I believe it's 1969, if I'm not mistaken, that requires if anybody is arrested and it's a foreign national, you have to apprise them of the right of seeking legal counsel from your consulate. Well, back in the 19th century, if a Hawaiian got in trouble, the first place he would look for is his consulate to get some advice. So the fact that we had over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world is an indicator that we're pretty sophisticated, right? And Hawaii was multi-ethnic. 86% of the national population, called Hawaiian subjects, were native or Aboriginal. Okay, the balance, the 14%, were non-Aboriginal. So people like Sanford Dole, Lauren Thurston, yeah, all these insurgents, they're actually Hawaiian. They weren't American. They were Haole, but they were Hawaiian. They were Hawaiian subjects. Yeah. What was interesting, they were trying to convey or portray themselves to the U.S. Embassy as if they're American because they're white. No, they're actually, Lauren Thurston is a third generation Hawaiian. And his grandfather, Asa Thurston, was the first group of missionaries that came in. And did you know Asa Thurston gave up his American citizenship and got naturalized as a Hawaiian subject? Now, wait a minute. I thought America was taking over Hawaii. You don't do that by giving up your American citizenship, right? Freddie Rice. You guys ever heard of him? Yeah. His great-great-grandfather got naturalized as well as a Hawaiian subject. So the terms that we need to understand before we get into what we're going to cover today is the term independence. Anybody know what independence means? Because we hear it a lot. Independence movement, right? Anybody? What do you guys think?
Free from other laws.
Huh?
Free from other countries.
Almost there, Uncle, right? Some people think of independence as being physically separate from somebody, right? I'm independent from you. I have freedom from you. Actually, the term independence is a political term. And it is used with regard to what is called the state. The state, some people call the nation state, but the state is a country. So when you have a state, that state is independent, called an independent and sovereign state. What that means is the state itself has its own legal system that exists independent of other legal systems over other territories of other states. So you can be a state and not be independent. Okay, so let's take a look at New York as an example. So did you know that New York used to be a British colony? There was one of 13 colonies that were fighting for their independence, right, from Great Britain. They were fighting from 1776 until 1783, 7 years of fighting. That's a revolution. They finally were able to control the territory and take it away from the British. And that's what led to the Treaty of Peace, where King George III recognized the 13 former colonies, which included New York, as 13 independent states in a confederation, which is a loose union of independent states. What that meant was New York law applied to New York. Georgia law applied over Georgia. That's why they were independent, but they were in a loose union called a confederation for protection. So you can be an independent state and be a part of a union called a confederation without losing your independence. An example of that would be the European Union today. So the European Union is made up of independent states that are in an economic union, an economic type of relationship, right? But they're still independent. And right now, Great Britain is trying to do a Brexit, right? They're trying to get out of that union.
Is that what Kalakaua was doing with the Pacific Confederation?
Yep. So Kalakaua, a good point that was brought up, King Kalakaua, he was moving toward creating a confederation throughout Oceania of independent states, right? And he was going to team up with Japan to be the leader of the confederation in order to repel European aggression. In fact, the whole point was to deal with French aggression in Central Polynesia, because there were 3 countries in Central Polynesia, Bora Bora, Huahine, Raiatea, that were recognized as independent states. Tahiti wasn't, became a colony, and then in 1880s the French just went ballistic and they just took over everyone, and that's what we know today as French Polynesia. Did you know Kalakaua was trying to prevent that, trying to get them to stop that, and his move was to create a confederation. Now a confederation is different from a federation. Confederation, federation. So when the 13 former colonies became independent states, New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, their laws existed over their territories. In 1789, 6 years of independence, each having independence, they gave up their independence into a federal government. And that's when they transformed themselves from a confederation into a federation, where the United States of America is now the independent state, but the state of New York still exists, but it's not independent anymore. And the way you can tell if it's not independent, there's another law being imposed in that territory. So after 1789, when these 13 colonies became 13 independent states, and then they formed a federation, you not only have New York law over New York, what other laws do you have in New York after 1789 when it became a federation?
U.S. federal law.
U.S. federal law passed by Congress in Washington, D.C. So now U.S. federal law applies in New York as well as New York law, but New York is still a state, but it's not independent. So you folks see how independent works? Okay, so for Hawaii, we were a part of Great Britain since 1794. That flag that you see flying upside down, which means a country in distress, because it's supposed to be right side up, right? You notice the Union Jack? That's British. Hawaii is part of the British Empire. We're in a colony. We're actually part of the British Empire. 1843, Timoteo Halilio, William Richards, and Sir George Simpson was able to get Great Britain to recognize Hawaiian independence. Just like how King George III recognized New York independence. The only difference is we didn't have a revolution. Our envoys actually played 3 countries against each other, because Hawaii was in the middle of the Pacific, right? Good strategic location. But Hawaii knew they needed to be a neutral port, neutral like Switzerland. But how do you get to that point? You gotta play one country against the other. So they played them. They went to to Washington, D.C. first. Says, hey, can you recognize our independence? And then they went to Great Britain. Can you recognize our independence? Because the U.S. is going to recognize our independence. They went to France. Hey, Great Britain is going to recognize. Why don't you recognize? Well, they eventually was able to get all 3 countries to recognize Hawaiian independence. But the main country to recognize Hawaiian independence of the 3 countries, Great Britain, France, and the United States, which one was the main one that needed to give us our recognition? Britain, right? Britain. because we were part of Great Britain. France and the United States just acknowledged the breakaway, right? But it was Great Britain that we had, our relationship. So when we became an independent state, that means only Hawaiian Kingdom law applies over our territory. Not British law, not American law, not French law. So every American in Hawaii as of 1843 cannot claim protection under the US Constitution. They can only claim protection as of civil rights under the Hawaiian Constitution, right? Just as a Hawaiian subject in Great Britain cannot claim protection under the Hawaiian Constitution, they got to claim protection under British law. If they're in America, they got to claim protection under American law. That's independence. So the fact that we had over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world is that all these countries recognize our independence. And that's important. Okay? So when you hear today people saying, oh, I'm part of the sovereignty movement, I'm part of the independence movement, that doesn't make sense. Why does that not make sense given our history? Anybody? Exactly. Because the only thing that was overthrown in 1893 illegally was our government, not our country and its independence. And the way the independence plays into a situation where the government is overthrown militarily is that the entity that overthrew that government, the other country, is obligated to administer the laws of the occupied country. That would be Hawaiian Kingdom law. If we lost our independence when the government was illegally overthrown, that rule wouldn't apply then. Because you don't administer the laws of the occupied state if you overthrew its government. Because if you overthrew its government, you overthrew its independence. No, you didn't. You overthrew the government, but you now carry the responsibility of serving as a proxy in this occupation. That's no different than what the United States did in Japan during the occupation of Japan from 1945 to 1952. General MacArthur from the military government was administering Japanese law from 1945 to 1952. He was not administering American law. Because if he was administering American law, that means Japan was a part of the United States. Japan was separate even though their government was overthrown in 1945. So from 1945 to 1952, Japanese law still applied. That's how international law works. Any questions so far? Yeah, did I lose anybody? You sure? Okay. Okay, so in 1893, January 16th, U.S. Marines landed at the order of the U.S. ambassador. When they landed, that happened without the consent of the Hawaiian government. That was an invasion. That's like when I was in the army and we land troops in Korea, South Korea, without the consent of the South Koreans. That's an act of war, right? Even though nobody fired a shot. It's the act alone which is hostile, which could lead to a hostile act, right? Which is killings. Here these Marines land without the consent of the Hawaiian government. In fact, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, his name was Samuel Parker. He was sending communication to the U.S. ambassador who ordered the landing of the troops. We didn't consent to that. Even the governor of Oahu was Archibald Cleghorn. He was the father of Princess Kaiulani. He was saying, get back on your ship. This is an act of war. They weren't listening to him. They were marching up Mililani Street, getting ready to be put in a defensive position facing Ali'olani, which is where Kamehameha's statue is, and the palace. They're getting ready for what's going to take place on the next day. Next day, certain people enter the government building where Kamehameha's statue is, and they read a piece of paper declaring themselves to be the new government of Hawaii, right? Trying to act as if they are a revolutionary group. To me, that's a sign of being cowards. They're reading a piece of paper and they keep looking back at the U.S. Marines. You got my back, right? Now, once you start looking at the U.S. Marines, once you start relying on the U.S. Marines, that means you're not a revolution. That means that a foreign state is involved. This is not an internal revolt. Now, an internal revolt, which is what happened with the American Revolution, that was an internal revolt, and they succeeded. An internal revolt is what you would call a coup d'etat. You folks ever heard of that? A coup d'etat. That's an internal revolt. Now, an invasion from an outside force is not a coup d'etat. That is what they call a coup de main. That's an invasion. Joseph Navahi wrote a letter on behalf of the Hawaiian Patriotic League to President Cleveland, and he stated what took place in 1893 was not a coup d'etat or revolution, it was a coup de main. Once you bring in that invasion aspect, you're now dealing with international law. So, January 17th, what was overthrown illegally was the Hawaiian government, where the Queen surrendered. She yielded her authority to the United States President to not continue, that could move into hostilities and death, right? These guys landed with Gatling guns and cannons and rifles. But also, you had 600 fully armed men who were police ready to go toe-to-toe with the Marines. The Queen was right in the middle. So this idea that our people were just sitting down, that's not the case. They were ready to engage. And Marshal Charles Wilson, the head of the police, did you know he was Tahitian? Tahitian Haole, but Hawaiian. Remember, the word Hawaiian is a nationality. You can be black, you can be white, you can be Mandarin, and you can be Hawaiian. You can be Tahitian and be Hawaiian. So he was ready to go. And the Queen basically said, stand down. Stand down. Let me yield my authority temporarily, make the record, this is under duress, and I'm calling upon an investigation to look into this rogue ambassador that landed U.S. Marines. Well, that's when everything took place as far as the overthrow. But that was the overthrow and seizure of a government, not the overthrow of a country. So we have to keep in mind, what was overthrown in 1893 was not the country. It was the government. And Queen Liliuokalani was asking for an investigation. And that investigation was followed through with President Grover Cleveland in 1893, March, where he sent over James Blunt, known for the Blunt reports, where he's investigating these actions, taking affidavits, gathering evidence, and reporting back to the Secretary of State, Walter Gresham. What I'm explaining to you here, if you guys notice, this is not a colonial situation. This is an issue between two sovereign states and military, dealing with Secretary of State, dealing with the Queen, dealing with the Marshal. It really changes the context from what we used to think of it as, like this was us against them, the natives against the foreigner. No, this was about allegiance. This was about law. This was about compliance. So James Blunt was reporting from April to July periodically, called the Blunt Reports, and Walter Gresham is the Secretary of State gathering the information. He's in Washington. He finalizes everything after the last report in July from James Blunt, the final report, and he makes a report to the US President, at that time Grover Cleveland, on October 18th, 1893. October. Tells the President, we screwed up. By the threat of war, the head of state yielded her authority to our government to investigate. And we did that, and we have to restore her back to her authority. Now what's going on here? The only entity that was removed in the Hawaiian Kingdom government was the Queen, her cabinet of 4 ministers, and Marshal Charles Wilson, who were replaced by Sanford Dole and other insurgents. And I say insurgents because President Cleveland referred to them as insurgents. They weren't businessmen. They're insurgents. Replaced them, and everyone in government, the branches of government, were forced to sign oaths of allegiance to the new regime. So when they took over a very well-running car, right? They just changed the driver. That's what we call regime change in political science. That's all that happened. And that's why the song Kalana Napua, Mele Aloha Aina. You guys heard of that song? That was composed by Mrs. Prendergast on behalf of the Royal Hawaiian Band, who refused to sign the Oath of Allegiance. And one of the lyrics in there is very telling. It said, "Do not sign the paper of the enemy with its sin of annexation and loss of civil rights. That doesn't sound too cultural, yeah? Very political, right? That was the essence of what was going on. Well, the Royal Hawaiian Band, a bunch of them refused to sign off. They didn't have a job. That's like somebody refusing to arrest, no more job, right? Imagine that happening back then. The livelihood of what's going on. It was very tense at that time. Now, U.S. President then took Walter Gresham's report, and he put together a message to the U.S. Congress on December 18th, 1893. And he basically apprises the Congress the conclusion, because he's the head of the executive branch. Congress has no authority outside of U.S. territory, nor do the courts. It's only the president through the military or through the diplomats, the State Department. He told Congress that the U.S. military's presence in Honolulu on January 16, 1893 was in and of itself an act of war. Once you say act of war from a head of state, they're acknowledging state of war. That means the laws of war apply. One particular law that applies in the laws of war, called the law of occupation. You have to administer the laws of the occupied state until you get a treaty of conquest or a treaty of peace transferring that country to the United States. So that statement by Cleveland triggered international law. He also said that the government of a friendly and confiding people has been overthrown by an act of war. You notice how he said a friendly and confiding people. So we're at war with the United States, but we're not fighting them. This was all from the United States standpoint. But it still brings in the issue of the laws of war. There are 4 stages in war. In international law, it's referred to as jus in bello. Okay, this was my area of research. My expertise is in this area. First stage, act of war, trigger state of war. Okay, so let's use the example of Japan. So December 7th, 1941, when Japan's military attacked the U.S. military in Hawaii, that was an act of war. That triggered state of war, right? Now, violence. Then it goes to phase step 2, Treaty of Surrender. 1945, the Japanese signed the Treaty of Surrender on the USS Missouri in Japan. That's only the second stage of the state of war. 1945, after that surrender, the overthrow of the government of Japan, started the occupation of Japan. From 1945 to 1952, General MacArthur was head of the military government administering Japanese law. 1951, a treaty of peace was signed in San Francisco. Took effect in 1952. Occupation came to an end. Japan returned back, and the United States, to a state of peace. Japan was at war with the United States for 11 years. It didn't stop in 1945. It stopped in 1952. For Hawaii, what step are we at? Step 3, occupation. First step, act of war. President said, overthrow of the government. Surrender. The Queen surrendered January 17th, 1893. Third, occupation. Automatically. But the problem is the United States did not follow through in the law of occupation to begin to administer the laws of the occupied state. Because they didn't do it, didn't mean we're occupied. It's just they're not complying with the law. They were trying to conceal that Hawaii was actually overthrown, the government, through a coup d'etat. No, it's a coup de main. Not a coup d'etat. Because if it was a coup d'etat, why would President Cleveland say our government is overthrown by an act of war? An act of war is not revolutionary. Revolutionary is treason. The action taken by a military foreign force, that's an act of war, right? So you have these 2 narratives that are being thrown out there, and they're using it at the U.S. level in Congress. And they're trying to make sure that that the President, Cleveland, does not send the troops back to Hawaii to restore the Queen and her cabinet and Marshal Charles Wilson. But Hawaii was still occupied, even though the U.S. military left. What you call that is occupation by proxy. The proxy is the provisional government that the U.S. military put up. That's a puppet, right? That's called a proxy. Even though U.S. military is not here, they put them up, right? Then that proxy changed its name to the Republic of Hawaii and trying to act like they're a government. They're not. They're still insurgents. So here we are in stage 3, occupation, but the law of occupation is not being applied. We're still occupied, but more so, does the Hawaiian Kingdom still exist? It does, right? The country still exists. So then the question then is not about the overthrow. The question should be, how did the United States acquire the country? Correct? Well, you can only acquire a country by a treaty. So in the case of Japan, when they signed the Treaty of Peace, they did release certain lands that they used to have. In that case would be Formosa, which is what we know as Taiwan. They released it. They also released their claim to Korea, and that was in the treaty. In the case of the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Peace in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Mexicans released their territory north of the Rio Grande. So you have to do it by a treaty, right? The question is, do we have a treaty? We don't have a treaty. In 1898, the United States Congress passed a law called a joint resolution annexing Hawaii. Now, a joint resolution is a congressional act or congressional legislation. United States congressional laws, whether a joint resolution, which is an agreement between the House and the Senate, or a bill that becomes an act, is still limited to U.S. territory. U.S. laws have no effect in Canada. Canadian law has no effect in the United States. French law has no effect in Great Britain. Why is that? Why is it that they don't have effect? Kind of touched on that earlier. Because they got independence. They're all independent of each other because only their laws apply only over their territory. So can you see how important independence is once you get it? Not that we need to pursue it. No, that's assuming we don't have it. So once we have it, we can also say U.S. laws, even though you passed the law saying you got us, actually you don't. That's not even an argument. A U.S. law cannot annex a foreign country. But they're doing it anyway because they want Pearl Harbor. They're just making stuff up. This is America trying to become a world power. They weren't a world power before the Spanish-American War. They weren't. They were very isolated. Yeah, they always tried to maintain their neutrality. In fact, it really took them a lot to even get involved with World War I and World War II. They're trying to maintain their neutrality. Well, back in 1893 and 1898, they weren't a major power. But there was a guy from the U.S. Naval War College, Captain Alfred Mahon, that published a book in 1890 that advocated for America to increase its military spending to increase the size of the U.S. Navy. When you increase the size of the U.S. Navy, they're going to use the Navy to secure routes, economic routes for trade. In order to protect the trade routes, you need the Navy to protect it. In order to maintain the Navy, you got to have outposts. You got to have bases. 1893, the United States had no foreign bases. 1898, they're already eyeing up Pearl Harbor. Captain Alfred Mahon actually was asked by the U.S. Congress to justify the taking of Hawaii because of Pearl Harbor. They're also looking at Subic Bay in the Philippines. They're looking at Pago Pago, which was Samoa, but at that time, you had 3 countries claiming it: Great Britain, Germany, and the United States. 1900, they split it in half. American Samoa, guess where Pago Pago's in? The American side. And then Germans get the other part of Samoa, Western Samoa. The point I'm making is they need bases. This whole thing was being fabricated in the U.S. Congress to secure Hawaii as a military outpost. It wasn't about sugar. It was about military. Now, despite all this flexing of power, the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists, right? It wasn't transferred by a treaty. A joint resolution of annexation, it didn't do anything. So now they're coming, and in the Maui news, 1900. There was a guy named Thomas Clark in the Maui newspaper. The editor, Robertson, G.B. Robertson, was making commentary on Thomas Clark. Thomas Clark was saying Hawaii's still independent. How's that? There's no treaty, because he knew there was no, the joint resolution didn't annex anything. Thomas Clark is saying there's no treaty, we're still independent. And if I get into the territorial legislature, all the Democrats are going to show that. How's that? They're using the Democratic Party to prove that Hawaii is not part of the United States. That means Hawaiians were very politically active even after the takeover, right? Because they're politically astute, they're playing, and they're dealing with their situation. Well, Thomas Clark was actually from Wailuku, Maui, and the reason why he knew that Hawaii was not annexed and there's no treaty, because Thomas Clark was one of the signatories on the signature petition against annexation by the Hui Alohaina, the Hawaiian Patriotic League. That means everybody knew Hawaii is still independent. But what they're dealing with is U.S. military now coming in full force. That's when in 1898 the first U.S. military base was established, Camp McKinley, Kapiolani Park. Now we're dealing with another animal. A foreign country now has all their military coming in. And it's happening during the Spanish-American War because they're fighting the Spanish in Guam and the Philippines. And that's when Francis Newlands introduced that joint resolution to annex Hawaii. Senator Allen from Nebraska, on the record, he says, you can't annex a country by passing a law. They're all saying that. They're all saying it. How come we don't know that today? What happened, right? They're saying it. You can't do it. The others were saying, who are proponents of annexation, hey, we're American, we can do whatever we want. Well, but you still didn't do it because a joint resolution didn't annex anything. Thomas Clark knew that. And that's 2 years after 1898. So then in 1900, the U.S. Congress passes another law called the Territorial Act. What they did was they renamed the Hawaiian Kingdom government, called the Territory of Hawaii. Remember, they just took over an existing car and kept the driver, the insurgent, Sanford Dole, driving the car. But it's still in American law, right? The Territorial Act is no different than the joint resolution. Okay? Now, why is it today we think Hawaii is a part of the United States? That's what I was taught when I was at Kamamaluula. I didn't think anything otherwise. It's not like it was an issue, right? It was a pure assumption on my part that we're American. I went to a military college after Kamamaluula, got my commission as a second lieutenant. You know, I had no problem because I didn't know there was a problem. 1959, Congress passes another law, changing the name from the Territory of Hawaii to the State of Hawaii. It's still a congressional law. It has no effect on the borders of the United States. Now, today, why is it that we don't know what Thomas Clark knew in 1893? Why is that? It's called brainwashing. So in the handout that you folks have here, the first one is an article that I wrote for the National Education Association. The National Education Association, this article titled The U.S. Occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, explains what I just shared with you, right? And the National Education Association is the largest union of American school teachers across the United States, and that the Hawaii State Teachers Association is an affiliate member. In 2017, the delegates from the Hawaiian State Teachers Association at their annual conference in Boston, Massachusetts, got a resolution passed by over 1,000 delegates that the NEA will publish an article on the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, the illegal occupation of Hawaii by the United States, and the harmful effects that it has had on the Hawaiian people. I was asked to write those 3 articles for the NEA. This is the second one. It explains here what actually took place. Now, we also have another handout that I'm now going to talk about. Right here. Program for Patriotic Exercises in the public schools and private schools. 1906, this came out. Okay, So the terms we gotta use gotta be international terms, right? So if one country occupies another country, the country still exists and the law of occupation applies. One particular prohibition, what is prohibited from doing, is denationalizing. So when one country occupies another country, they cannot denationalize the nationals or the people of the occupied state. Germany did that during World War I and World War II. It was called Germanization. That prompted in 1919 for the Commission, United Allied countries, they were called United Nations, but that was before the UN was created in 1945. But this entity called this commission, made up of allied countries, just to keep it simple, they identified war crimes. One of the war crimes was attempt to denationalize the inhabitants of occupied territory. That's a war crime. What is denationalization? It is to obliterate the national character of the minds of the people. Now remember Thomas Clark, right? He's an adult. He was 41 years old when he signed the signature petition in 1897. Can you honestly think, and let's put you in Thomas Clark's position, you are all adults. Can I obliterate the national consciousness in your mind right now of what you believe? Well, let me put it this way. I'm a Russian. Okay, my name is Vladimir. I just landed in Kauai with a huge naval armada. I just invaded Big Island and you're all under occupation. And I'm going to denationalize you by Russianization. I'm going to get you to believe you're Russian. And you're going to speak Russian. Da? Which is yes in Russian. Can I honestly get you to believe you're Russian? Can I?
No.
There's no way. Now, if I do get you to say you're Russian, you're only doing that because you're afraid of me and the military behind me. You can say whatever you gotta say. That's called survival. But I didn't change your mind. I just got you to watch what you say and be careful. Now, who do I change the minds of? Whose national consciousness can I change? Your children. I already took over the government. I'm also taking over all the schools, private and public. The public school system started in the Hawaiian Kingdom in the 1830s. Private schools, Kamamaluula, 1887. St. Louis, 1846. Puuhuluhulu, 1837, I believe. St. Andrew's Priory, 1870s. You know, a lot of the schools today are from the Kingdom era. They had all the children. Guess what? Program for patriotic exercises to be used in the school. All you're going to learn is American history. You speak Hawaiian, the national language, you get beaten. You speak English. We hear the stories of Kupuna talking about getting beaten for speaking Hawaiian. This is exactly what the Germans were doing in Belgium and Luxembourg. But where they could not succeed in denationalizing because they only had 4 years or 5 years of occupation, this is going to start in 1906 as a formal policy, and it's going to continue for over a century. Guess what? We are all victims of denationalization. I can tell the way you talk. You've been denationalized. Here, you learn songs such as Yankee Doodle Dandy. When you guys go over it, you got to read it. It's all there. And they were denationalizing not just natives, everyone. Everyone. And then there was your next handout, Harper's Weekly Magazine, 1907, out of New York. They sent a reporter to Hawaii to do a story on denationalization. And they visited 2 schools. Ka'iolani Public School, grades 1 through 8. Ka'ahumanu Public School, grade 1 through 8. And Honolulu High School, before the name was changed in 1911 to President William McKinley High School, part of the propaganda, right? So what they did, this reporter went to Ka'iolani Public School, 714 school children. You got to read the article. And you know what's amazing? They're so blatant with it. I mean, the arrogance of it. And they say that at the command of the principal, 714 school children stand at attention. And they start marching. This is my tutu's generation. And then they line up in front of the American flag, and at the command of the principal, they salute. And at the command of the principal, they yell in unison, "We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag." This scene shows a salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Ka'iulani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. The word inculcate is brainwashing through repetition. That's the definition of inculcate. I cannot believe they even put that in there. They could have just said to make better Americans, but no, they're shoving it, right? Now imagine you are Thomas Clark and your daughter is coming home from Ka'iulani Public School. What do? Doesn't that put you in a position? Do you keep talking to her in Hawaiian, which is the national language? If you do, she's going to get beaten. You cannot put that child in a charter school like we have today. What do? All of a sudden, our kupuna of the children, these parents had to make a decision. And that's when you start to hear them saying, speak English. Be a good American. That was merely for survival. Now throughout this time though, I'm going to go back again. Does the Hawaiian Kingdom still exist? Yeah. But they're now starting to erase it in the minds of the people. To erase it from your memory does not mean it doesn't exist. They're just denationalizing you. So by that time of denationalization, by the time I got to my parents' generation in the 1930s when my parents were born, it's already institutionalized. When my dad went to St. Louis, he didn't know anything. Nothing. By the time I went to Kamehameha schools, 1978 to 1982, out of sight, out of mind. Clueless. That's what we're dealing with today. The insurgents of 1893 are dead. But their legacy continues through denationalization and the false narratives that they've done, right? Any questions so far? So what we have in Hawaii was not that we're part of the United States, we're an occupied state. And this is occupation. And Hawaiian law still applies. And people today need to know what are Hawaiian laws and not just say Hawaiian law, right? Yes, sir.
Why aren't organizations like Kamehameha schools that are backed by traditional Hawaiian money more active, or why weren't they more opposed to that kind of stuff?
Good point. The majority of the trustees of the Kamehameha schools were traitors. They were the insurgents. William O. Smith, Samuel Damon. Yeah. In fact, at Kamehameha schools, there's a building called Smith Hall, named after William O. Smith. Nobody thought anything of it until you find out who William O. Smith is, because people now know. And you're going, I think we better change the name. That's an insurgent. But that's how they were able to put themselves in stone and get everybody to believe a false narrative, when in fact these guys are criminals. That's like in America dedicating a hall in Harvard to Benedict Arnold. You would have an uproar amongst Americans, right? Get that name down, replace it with Paul Revere. Now we're starting to look at names. We're going, ooh, these people with names, not the family, the individuals, these are criminals. And President Cleveland referred to them as insurgents. I'm not referring to them as insurgent. President Cleveland did. In fact, President Cleveland said that these individuals were calling themselves a provisional government. He said their existence is as a result of an armed invasion by the United States. What has happened is everybody has been, well, not everybody. What has happened is they've managed to change the narrative into a native issue. A native issue. Now it looks like this is a native issue against the colonizer, right? Now this is a cultural issue and of the abuses. Although that's bad, that's safe for them, because even if it was wrong, they're not going to be held accountable. Once you start to reshift it back over to the law of occupation, war crimes, individual responsibility, see, that's when everybody goes, whoa, slow down. There's consequences here. So now that leads us to who owns the road. Yeah? And who owns that Mauna. This is the context, right? So 1848, like I stated, Kaohe, the ahupua of Kaohe, is government land, public land, administered by the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Humu'ula, this ahupua right here, is crown land, administered by the Crown Land Commissioners. Native tenants have rights in these lands. It's inherent in the land. It's a condition of title, subject to the rights of tenants. What that meant, a native tenant can get property from the government or from the Crown Land Commissioners. Native tenants can get fee simple title on Crown lands. Everybody else can only get 30-year leases. Hawaiian native tenants can get fee simple in Kaohe as a raw patent grant. So that's what it was in the Kingdom era, right? But supposedly, the United States said that these lands, called Crown and Government lands, roughly 1.8 million acres of 4 million acres throughout Hawaii, was ceded to the United States. You guys have heard of the word being used called ceded lands, right? Ceded lands. That's coming from brainwashing. Ceded lands. Cede, C-E-D-E, comes from the word cession. C-E-S-S-I-O-N. Treaty of Cession. You're ceding territory. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803, from France. A treaty of cession. All French territory west of the Mississippi River and adjacent to the territory of Mexico was French territory, but ceded to the United States for $14.5 million. That's a treaty. Louisiana Purchase did not take place as a result of a joint resolution. A joint resolution is a law of the United States. 1867, Treaty of Cession from Russia. They ceded Alaska, right? 1867. That gave the Congress the authority to create a territorial government there for Alaska in 1912. Then in 1959, the territory of Alaska had a plebiscite. They voted to become a state, to transform themselves from a territory to a state. Became the 49th state. The problem with Hawaii, where's the treaty? Where's the Russian treaty? Where's the French treaty? Right? You don't start off with Congress saying, we annexed you by passing a law. Nothing got annexed. So then how can you create a territorial government on territory you don't have authority under yet? And then how can you even have a plebiscite with Americans and Hawaiians who are brainwashed to believe they're American, saying they want to be the state of Hawaii? The bottom line is there's no treaty. So that means if there's no treaty, then the title to government land, Kaohe, belongs to the Minister of the Interior. We need to look, where did he convey that to? There's no record of any conveyance or from the Hawaiian Kingdom government. What about Humu'ula? There's no conveyance from the Crown Land Commissioners. The only claim that they're claiming is a joint resolution of 1898. Okay, a joint resolution, again, cannot annex anything. Okay, let me kind of explain it this way. A treaty, so Auntie, what's your name? Belita. Okay, so let's say Auntie is, she wants to buy my property, right? Now, in order for me to convey my property in Mountain View, right, I need to convey to Auntie a deed, a warranty deed, right? Meaning I am ceding, I am transferring my title to you, right? She receiving it, I'm giving it. Then I record that in the Bureau of Conveyances, good title. Now, proof she owns it, point to the deed in the public record. Okay. Now, Auntie, because she can't get me to transfer my property, she cannot come out on her own and say, I made a proclamation, I own your property. Right? And they call it a joint resolution. Oh, I own it. Okay, first of all, by you saying I own it, is clearly stating you didn't receive it. You're just saying I got it. Right? That's a joint resolution. I got it. Okay, got what? Where's the treaty? Where's the deed? No deed, no title. That's why the title is still with the Hawaiian government that was overthrown in 1893. So I don't think you can get consent from a government you overthrew. Guess what? Title's protected by the fact you overthrew it. And then the Crown Land Commissioners, guess what? You overthrew it. You can't get title. Okay, we're just going to say we got it. Well, that doesn't fly until you get into the schools and you get people to believe a treaty was done and you acquired it through a ceded land process. That's why today we say ceded lands, yet there's no treaty. So please stop saying ceded lands. Call it seized lands. Call it government and crown lands, which have native tenant rights in it as part of the condition of title. So, in light of that, Kaohe, where they want to build, how did TNT get that title called a lease? Well, this is how it worked without us knowing. So in 1898, supposedly something was ceded when it wasn't. Then in 1959, the US federal government transferred the ceded lands that they received in 1898, which they didn't. They ceded it to the state of Hawaii under the Statehood Act called 5F Trust, right? And the revenues are going to be there for Native Hawaiians, but yet it was created by a law created by Congress that has no effect in Hawaii. You guys caught that?
Yeah, but we never get nothing.
Then the Board of Land and Natural Resources of the state of Hawaii in 1968 enters into a lease for 11,000 acres to the University of Hawaii to build telescopes. University of Hawaii then entered into subleases with those previous telescopes that was already built, and recently, most recently, a sublease to TNT to build. TNT then enters into a contract with the contractor called Goodfellow, a company in Maui, with local workers to go build TNT. Once you start to bring in the issue of no title, there went the contract with Goodfellow. That's like asking somebody to go build a telescope on Auntie's property, but we forgot to ask Auntie for her consent. And under international law, did you know that when you destroy property, that's a war crime? Yeah, that's a war crime. Now Goodfellow is getting caught in the mix. No title. Then Senator Kaikahele, Hawaiian Home supposedly got Puuhuluhulu, Crown land. DLNR has that land. Supposedly the Department of Transportation claims to own that road. Kaikahele, Senator Kaikahele is asking questions. When did you guys transfer this road from Hawaiian Homes to the Department of Transportation? William Isla can't answer it. And then he finally realizes, you're right, it's Hawaiian Homelands. But yet all the arrests happen by the order of people from the Department of Transportation. It's like people arresting people in Auntie's property when the other property over here is where they're supposed to have been. You see what happens when everybody's walking into things ignorant and just following what people say, and all of a sudden they're getting caught? Why are they getting caught? Because people are asking the right questions. And sometimes when you ask the right questions, people don't like it because it's too harsh. It's too real. Well, just as Senator Kaikahele is asking who owns that road, which he got the answer, it's not DOT. It's, Tamara Polton, council member from Maui. She's now directing her inquiry with President Lasner from UH, because he's the one responsible for the sublease to TNT. And she basically is pointing out to her, UH has no title up there because of everything I just shared with you. And then she says to him, if you think I'm wrong, based upon my my request for information from Dr. Sai, because she asked me what my thoughts are, she put it in a letter, sent it to Lasner. She said, if Dr. Sai is in error, have your legal counsel, your attorney, refute it. Lasner didn't give it to the attorney because they know what's going to happen. But what they want to keep doing is focusing on culture, right? So they don't have to answer the question. That's why all of us, hey, it's good we have culture, but ask about the title. No title. And now that right there relieves a lot of our family members from this crisis who are police officers, maybe working for Goodfellow, right? So whether you support or don't support TNT, sorry, wrong yard. We're talking this yard, and Auntie didn't give her consent. That's proof. And that cuts right to everything. There is no argument to be made. I'm for TNT. I'm against TNT. Right on. No title. Both sides, power-ready. That's how it works. It's like heat the knife and cut right through the butter. It goes real easy, you know. But when you heat that knife, people get scared. You know, when people go, "Whoo, getting hot in here." Yeah, because I'm asking the right questions. That's how William Isla felt when Kai Kahele was drilling him. You know, it's interesting. I saw Kai. I know Kai. And he's military too. So he tells me, Keanu, like the military, get our intel first. We got to get intel. And for every question we ask, we got to have the answer. I said, right on, brother. See, America trained us well in the military. That's the right question. The irony of ironies, yeah? And that's why what I'm doing here is I'm not against America, right? And I'm really not promoting Hawaiian. I'm just saying this is the Hawaiian Kingdom. I don't have to promote it, right? And anybody and everybody is welcome here as long as you follow the law. Because I would hope that you would get me, or to ensure that I, in your country, whether Great Britain, France, United States, I follow your law. That's how it's supposed to work. The rule of law. Yes, sir. I'm sorry?
What are the current Hawaiian laws? Like, where is there a, U.S. has a constitution. What defines the Kingdom of Hawaii's laws?
Perfect. See, what's happening now is we're starting to ask the right questions. So I would recommend, so in the Hawaiian Kingdom, before 1893, the last laws that were passed by the Hawaiian legislature was the legislative session of 1886. Because after that, the insurgency began in what has come to be known as the Bayonet Constitution, right? So the Bayonet Constitution should be a indicator that something's wrong when you attach the word bayonet to a constitution. You know, that's a red flag right there. So the last laws, session laws that were passed was 1886, and those laws amended the criminal code and the penal code, right? So you have what is called the compiled laws of 1884, along with the session laws of 86 and 84, and you can go to hawaiiankingdom.org, that website, and look on the buttons to the left. You're going to see Constitution and Laws. Hit that, you'll see the Constitution that preceded the 1887 bayonet and the session laws, and it explains why these laws are the laws. Now, what we're dealing with today from a practical standpoint, those laws back then have to be brought up to date to now, right? There's a way to do that. In fact, every law that has been passed by the legislatures, illegal legislatures since 1887 until now, including federal statutes, would continue to be the laws of the occupied state, so long as these laws do not run contrary to the letter, spirit, and intent of Hawaiian Kingdom law. So an example would be driver's license. Obviously, the Hawaiian Kingdom didn't have driver's license in 1893. You guys know why, huh? There were no automobiles. People rode on horseback, right, or buggies. But if the Hawaiian Kingdom had to deal with automobiles, don't you think they would have a license? In fact, did you know the Hawaiian Kingdom did have a driver's license for buggies? Yeah, that was actually regulated under Hawaiian law. So if you drive a buggy in Honolulu with a horse, you have to have a license. They're going to check because they want to make sure you know how to handle. Because you know what can happen? A horse driven by a buggy driven by a horse can be very dangerous if that horse spooks. In fact, here's a story about that. 1850s. Kamehameha III was on a horse, right? It got spooked. It went crazy. Kamehameha III went off. John Papa EE, right? John EE, this is cool. He ran to make sure the king is okay. He went to the horse, pop, hit him, dropped him. That is a true story. Now, wouldn't that also be an indicator that you got to make sure people with horses better know how to ride a horse? So the Hawaiian Kingdom was regulating that. So chances are they would have regulated driver's license, right? They would have regulated airplanes coming in, right? Things that weren't there. So there is a way to transition without living in the past. It's a matter of bringing the past to the present within the framework of the rule of law and the law of occupation. And that was actually the subject of my doctoral dissertation. How do you fix the problem? See, I'm not into exacerbating the problem. I'm here to fix the problem because I gotta live here. My mo'opuna gotta live here. And if I don't take care of my part, my mo'opuna, my granddaughter, is gonna look back in time and says, Papa, why you didn't do anything? Oh, now I feel bad. Now I say, oh, Papa did this, and Papa did that, and everybody did this. So everybody becomes a part of the solution. It's not about blaming anybody. Yeah? Remember, you point your finger. My tutu told me 3 fingers point back at you. Put your finger down. Because maybe I didn't know. And why should I treat other people differently if they don't know what I know? Because in the past, they didn't know what I know, just like how I didn't know before 1994. How can I judge somebody now? So this is where Kapu Aloha actually works with our own people beyond just here. We're here to fix the problem. We're not here to exacerbate it. And we're not indigenous people. Hawaii wasn't colonized, but we do support indigenous people's rights and nations that have been colonized to become decolonized. We're an occupied state. We're into deoccupation, but number one, compliance. Comply with the law of occupation.
What are examples of laws that would run contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law? You said.
Okay, so one law that runs contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law, IRS taxes. You're not supposed to be collecting IRS taxes in a foreign country unless you're an American, right? You don't impose IRS laws in a foreign country. So that right there now deals with the issue of reparation. What about all those people who were paying IRS taxes in Hawaii, which was illegal? It's called reparations. That all comes into negotiation.